Hello folks, welcome to the RPA Vanguard channel. My name is Andy Menon. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the fundamental concept of arguments in UiPath automations. Basic familiarity with things such as building basic UiPath automations and arguments are required to follow this short video. With that, let's hit the ground. For this video, I have built a simple automation that is open in UiPath Studio. The main flow accepts a couple of input arguments and displays their values in message boxes. The two arguments are strings that have been initialized with their default values. But I will be focusing on something that you might not have noticed or worked with, and that is the IsRequired attribute of arguments that you see in the argument properties window. As seen here, both the arguments are similar, but only one of them has the IsRequired attribute enabled. So let's run this automation in Studio and see what happens. Okay, so there's nothing spectacular about this. We saw that the automation performed as expected and displayed the default values of the two arguments in message boxes. But is this behavior the same when I run this as an attended automation from UiPath Assistant? Let me quickly deploy this automation to the orchestrator and talk to you on the other side. Right. I'm in the Orchestrator instance, and as you can see, I have deployed our automation with a fancy name so that it appears first on the list. Let's quickly take a look at the settings. Here we see that the two arguments are listed as expected, but one of them has an asterisk beside it. This is because we marked this argument as required by checking the IsRequired attribute. But if you look at the value column, it states that both these arguments will inherit their values from their parent package, which obviously means that the default values that we initialized are the ones this automation is going to inherit from its parent package. But is that true? I'm going to close this screen and jump on to the UiPath Assistant next. Now we can see that our fancy automation is accessible in UiPath Assistant. But before we run it, let's take a look at its arguments. Unlike what you saw in the orchestrator, there is no visual element differentiating the required argument and the optional argument. So what happens when we run this automation? Will it display the default values it inherits from its package, or will it behave differently? Let's run the automation to find out. And this is what we get when we try to run the automation from Assistant. This is not what we saw when we ran the very same code in Studio. The automation has been stalled as it awaits user inputs for its arguments. It might appear that the two inputs are required, but no, it is looking for inputs only for the required argument. To see if that is true, let's watch what happens to the Save button when you type values into the argument fields. As you can see, typing a value into the optional argument field did not enable the Save button. But when you entered a value into the required argument field, the Save button was enabled. So the takeaway from this behavior is that default values do not apply for arguments marked as IsRequired. I'm not going to run this just yet. Let's get out of the screen and go back to the Arguments panel in Assistant. You will see the same behavior with the Arguments panel as well. Unless you fill in the value for the required argument, the Save button will remain disabled and stop you from proceeding further. This time, I'll put in the values, save them, and run the automation. The values output are the ones that you just provided instead of the defaults used to initialize the arguments during the deployment of this automation. Next, let's see what happens if we run the automation by removing the optional argument value. This time, the optional value output was the default value inherited from the package, and the required value remained unchanged from the previous test. On further testing, you will see that once you put in a value for an argument that is marked IsRequired, you cannot remove it. Instead, you can only change it to a different value before running the automation. Bottom line, if an argument is marked IsRequired in Studio, you will need to provide it before you run the automation for the very first time. Optional arguments, on the other hand, are not constrained by this limitation. I personally think that the IsRequired attribute is especially useful for attended automations. This will prevent human users from crashing their RPA processes because they forgot to provide a required input. As far as I know, anticipating and preventing a failure means saving yourself one support ticket from your business team. That's all for this video. I hope you found this information useful. Please let me know your thoughts in the comment sections below. Thank you and happy automating.